Daniel 6, Faithfulness under pressure. When the Babylonian Empire fell, history did not descend into chaos. Power changed hands, but God remained in control. The Medo-Persian Empire rose with a structure different from Babylon's, more administrative, more bureaucratic, more rigid in law. It was under this new regime that Daniel, now an elderly man, once again found himself at the center of political life. King Darius reorganized the kingdom into satrapies, appointing 120 satraps over the realm, with 3 administrators set above them. Daniel 6:1-2. Daniel was one of these 3. Scripture emphasizes that he distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps because an excellent spirit was found in him. Daniel 6:3. His integrity, wisdom, and consistency made him stand out, not through ambition but through faithfulness. So remarkable was Daniel's character that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. Daniel 6:3. This decision, however, stirred jealousy. The other administrators and officials resented Daniel's influence. He was a foreigner, a captive from Judah, yet his conduct exposed their corruption. His presence threatened the comfort of those who benefited from dishonesty. They searched for grounds to accuse him in his conduct of government affairs. But Scripture is explicit. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Daniel 6:4. This statement reveals more than Daniel's personal virtue. It reveals the moral decay of the system around him. In a corrupt environment, integrity becomes disruptive. Unable to find fault in Daniel's work, his enemies turned their attention to his faith. They concluded that the only way to trap him would be through the law of his God. Daniel 6:5. This decision exposes a recurring pattern in history. When righteousness cannot be discredited, it is criminalized. The officials approached King Darius with a proposal carefully crafted to appeal to his pride. They suggested that the king issue a decree requiring that for 30 days, anyone who prayed to any god or human being except the king would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel 6:7. The proposal appeared unified, though Daniel himself was conspicuously absent from the discussion. The decree elevated the king to a position of exclusive devotion. Though framed as a political measure, it was fundamentally religious. It replaced loyalty to God with loyalty to the state. The law exploited the immutability of Medo-Persian legislation, which once enacted could not be altered. Daniel 6:8. Darius, unaware of the manipulation behind the request, signed the decree. When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he did not panic. He did not protest publicly. He did not seek political protection. Scripture states simply that he went home, where the windows of his upper room opened toward Jerusalem, and he knelt down and prayed 3 times a day, giving thanks to God just as he had done before. Daniel 6:10. This verse is central to the chapter. Daniel did not alter his habits to provoke attention, nor did he conceal his devotion to preserve safety. His faith was neither reactionary nor performative. It was consistent. His obedience to God preceded the decree and continued unchanged after it. Daniel's prayer posture was intentional. Facing Jerusalem was an act of hope rooted in God's promise that prayers offered toward the temple would be heard. 1 Kings 8:46-49. Though the temple lay in ruins, Daniel's faith rested not in structures but in covenant. The officials, watching closely, found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Daniel 6:11. Approaching the king, they reminded him of the decree and its unchangeable nature. Then they accused Daniel of defiance, emphasizing his identity as one of the exiles from Judah who showed no regard for the king or the decree. Daniel 6:13. The charge framed faithfulness as rebellion. When King Darius heard this, he was deeply distressed. Scripture notes that he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Daniel 6:14. The king recognized that he had been manipulated, yet the law he had signed bound him. The officials returned, insisting that no decree or edict issued by the king could be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, Daniel 6:15. Trapped by his own authority, Darius was forced to enforce a law he no longer supported. Reluctantly, the king ordered Daniel to be brought and thrown into the lion's den. But before the stone was sealed, Darius spoke words that reveal a surprising faith. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you, Daniel 16. The king had come to trust the God of Daniel more than the legal system he governed. A stone was placed over the mouth of the den and sealed with the king's signet ring and the rings of his nobles. So, humanly speaking, there was no escape. That night, Darius returned to his palace and spent it fasting. No entertainment was brought before him, and sleep fled from him, Daniel 6:18. The contrast is striking. While Daniel rested in the den, the king lay restless in his palace. Ellen Grams. White reflects on Daniel's faithfulness with clarity. In the experience of Daniel is given an illustration of what constitutes true loyalty to God. He was faithful to principle, and God honored him. Ellen Grams White, Prophets and Kings, p543. Daniel 6 reveals a faith tested not by sudden temptation, but by sustained pressure. It shows a servant of God who had learned long before that obedience is not situational. Daniel's trust did not depend on outcomes. It was rooted in relationship. The chapter closes this phase of the narrative with Daniel sealed in the den, not because he rebelled, but because he refused to compromise a known duty. The tension rests not in whether Daniel prayed, but in whether faithfulness would be vindicated. The answer would come at dawn. The night Daniel spent in the lion's den was not merely a test of survival, it was a revelation of where true security lies. While the law of the Medes and Persians claimed to be unchangeable, Daniel rested in the care of a God whose authority transcends every human system. Scripture does not record Daniel's words in the den, but the silence itself speaks volumes. His life had already testified. At the first light of dawn, King Darius hurried to the lion's den, his voice filled with anguish as he called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel 6:20. The question itself reveals a transformation in the king. He no longer speaks of gods in the abstract. He acknowledges the living God and recognizes Daniel's unwavering service. Daniel answered calmly, without bitterness or triumph, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, Your Majesty." Daniel 6:21-22. Daniel did not attribute his deliverance to courage, intelligence, or fate. He attributed it to God's intervention and to a clear conscience before both heaven and earthly authority. The king was overjoyed and ordered Daniel to be lifted from the den. Scripture emphasizes that no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Daniel 6:23. Trust, not circumstance, is identified as the decisive factor. Daniel's faith was not reactive, it was habitual. He trusted God long before the crisis arose. Justice followed swiftly. The men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, along with their families, and before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them. Daniel 6:24. It underscores that the issue was never the lions, but the misuse of power and the manipulation of law against righteousness. In response, King Darius issued a new decree to all peoples, nations, and languages throughout his kingdom. This time, the proclamation did not exalt the king. It exalted God, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Daniel 6:26. The king acknowledged God as living and enduring forever, whose kingdom would not be destroyed, and whose dominion would never end. Daniel 6:26-27. This declaration is significant. Babylon had demanded worship through coercion. Medo-Persia attempted to regulate devotion through law, but God revealed himself through faithfulness and deliverance. The contrast is unmistakable. Earthly powers enforce conformity, God honors conviction. Daniel's story does not end with personal rescue. Scripture concludes the chapter by noting that Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel 6:28. His faithfulness did not remove him from public life. It sustained him within it. God did not call Daniel to withdraw, but to steadfast presence. Daniel 6 presents a mature faith, quiet, disciplined, unshaken. It is the faith of someone who had learned over decades that obedience to God does not depend on favorable conditions. Laws may change, governments may rise and fall, but loyalty to God remains constant.
The chapter leaves us with a profound truth. When human authority conflicts with divine command, faithfulness may carry a cost, but compromise carries a far greater one.
Daniel's life stands as testimony that integrity before God is never wasted, even when misunderstood, opposed, or punished by the world. And with Daniel lifted from the den at dawn, the narrative affirms once again what Scripture has shown repeatedly. God remains sovereign, attentive, and faithful to those who trust Him fully, regardless of age, position, or circumstance. Daniel 6 does not merely record a miracle, it exposes a collision between two authorities, one temporary, the other eternal. On the surface, the conflict appears political, rival administrators exploiting legal mechanisms to remove an inconvenient colleague. But beneath that surface lies a deeper struggle between human systems that demand absolute loyalty and a faith that reserves ultimate allegiance for God alone. The law crafted against Daniel was carefully designed. It did not target wrongdoing, corruption, or rebellion. It targeted devotion. The decree forbade prayer to any god or human being except the king for 30 days, Daniel 6:7. The restriction seemed limited in time and scope, but its intention was absolute. It sought to redefine worship, even temporarily, placing the authority of the state above the conscience of the believer. Daniel's response reveals much about his spiritual maturity. He did not organize resistance. He did not seek loopholes. He did not adjust his habits to avoid attention. Scripture states plainly that when Daniel learned of the decree, he went home, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed 3 times a day, just as he had done before Daniel 6:10. His faith was not reactive, it was consistent. His obedience did not begin at the moment of crisis, it was already established. The open windows are significant. Daniel did not pray publicly to provoke confrontation, but neither did he hide his devotion to preserve comfort. His prayer life was visible because it was habitual. The text emphasizes continuity, just as he had done before. Faithfulness in Daniel's life was not a dramatic gesture, it was a settled pattern. They found Daniel praying and reported him to the king, carefully reminding Darius of the irrevocability of the law of the Medes and Persians, Daniel 6:12. The king's reaction is revealing. Scripture says he was greatly distressed and made every effort until sundown to save Daniel, Daniel 6:14. Darius recognized Daniel's integrity, yet found himself trapped by the very system he upheld. This moment highlights the limits of human authority. The king possessed power, yet lacked freedom. He ruled an empire, yet could not reverse a law crafted in his own name. In contrast, Daniel stood condemned by the law, yet remained inwardly free. The narrative quietly reverses expectations. The ruler is constrained, and the servant is secure. When Daniel was brought to the lion's den, the king spoke words that sound more like a prayer than a command. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you, Daniel 6:16. These words echo the growing recognition that Daniel's God operated beyond legal systems, beyond royal authority, beyond human control. The sealing of the den with the king's signet ring emphasizes finality. From a human perspective, the matter was settled. Daniel was alone. The night stretched long. No angel is mentioned entering the den. No dramatic description of divine intervention is given. Scripture offers no spectacle, only trust. This restraint in the narrative is intentional. The focus is not on the mechanics of deliverance, but on the faith that preceded it. Daniel's God did not intervene because Daniel was fearless. He intervened because Daniel was faithful. The miracle flows from relationship, not from desperation. Daniel 6 reveals that the greatest threat to faith is rarely open persecution. It is legal conformity. It is the quiet pressure to suspend devotion just for a season. The decree did not demand apostasy, it demanded silence. It did not command idolatry, it required omission. Yet for Daniel, obedience to God was not negotiable, even temporarily. The chapter confronts every generation with a timeless question: what authority governs your conscience? Laws may be enforced, customs may be normalized, pressure may be subtle, but devotion, once compromised, reshapes the soul. Daniel's experience under Medo-Persian rule confirms a truth already revealed in earlier chapters. Kingdoms change, methods differ, but the conflict remains the same. Babylon demanded worship through spectacle. Medo-Persia enforced loyalty through legislation. Yet in both cases, God's people were called to faithfulness without defiance, obedience without fear, and trust without conditions. Daniel 6 stands as a testimony that God's sovereignty does not require visible power to prevail. Sometimes it is revealed in silence, in restraint, in an elderly man kneeling by an open window, unmoved by trust. And the narrative continues, not with Daniel's elevation, but with God's vindication. Faithfulness, though costly, is never unseen. The night that followed Daniel's condemnation is one of the quietest yet most revealing moments in the chapter. Scripture does not describe panic inside the den, nor does it offer dramatic details of Daniel's emotions. The absence of description is itself instructive. Daniel's faith does not need embellishment. The focus is not on his fear, but on his trust. While Daniel faced the lions, King Darius faced his own torment. The text tells us that the king returned to his palace, spent the night without eating, refused entertainment, and could not sleep. Daniel 6:18. The irony is unmistakable. The man with power lies restless, while the condemned servant rests in the hands of God. Authority without righteousness produces anxiety. Faithfulness, even under threat, produces peace. At dawn the king hurried to the lion's den and called out with anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel 6:20. This question reveals how deeply Daniel's weakness had already impacted the king. Darius did not speak of Daniel's intelligence or administrative skill. He identified him by devotion, the God whom you serve continually. Daniel's reply is brief, calm, and devoid of triumph. "May the king live forever," he says. There is no bitterness, no accusation, no sense of vindication. Daniel explains simply that God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions because he was found innocent, not only before God, but also before the king. Daniel 6:22. Faithfulness to God had produced integrity toward earthly authority as well. The deliverance does not exalt Daniel as a hero. It reveals God as sovereign. Daniel does not predict courage or resolve. He does not dramatize his survival. He attributes everything to divine intervention and to a life lived without guilt before God. The contrast between Daniel and his accusers is stark. The same system that could not be altered to save the innocent now acts swiftly to punish the guilty. The men who manipulated the law are thrown into the den, along with their families, and the lions overpower them before they reach the floor. Daniel 6:24. The narrative does not dwell on the violence. Its purpose is not retribution but revelation. Human systems built on envy and deceit collapse under their own weight. Darius responds with a proclamation that echoes previous royal decrees in the book of Daniel. He writes to all peoples and nations, declaring that everyone must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Daniel 6:26. The language emphasizes permanence. He is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed.
Once again, a pagan ruler acknowledges truths that align with earlier revelations about God's eternal kingdom. This pattern is consistent throughout Daniel.
Earthly rulers encounter the God of heaven not through conquest, but through faithful witnesses. God does not advance his kingdom by force, he reveals it through integrity. Daniel never preached publicly. He never confronted kings aggressively. His faith spoke through consistency, humility, and obedience. Daniel 6 concludes this section of the narrative by drawing attention not to Daniel's personal success, but to the nature of God's kingdom.
Darius's decree does not elevate Daniel to a divine status, nor does it establish a new religious system. Instead, it acknowledges a reality the king can no longer deny. There exists an authority higher than law, stronger than empire, and enduring beyond political cycles.
The king declares that God rescues and saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. Daniel 6:27. These words echo earlier confessions made by Nebuchadnezzar, revealing a consistent pattern. God allows earthly power to reach its limits so that his sovereignty may be recognized without ambiguity.
The recognition does not come through force, but through evidence, through a life preserved, a conscience clear, and a law exposed as insufficient. What is particularly striking is that Daniel's deliverance does not lead to rebellion or instability within the empire. Instead, it restores moral clarity. The king does not lose authority by acknowledging God, he regains perspective. The chapter suggests that true leadership is not diminished by reverence for God, but strengthened by it. Daniel's experience under Medo-Persian rule reveals that faithfulness does not isolate believers from society. Daniel remained active in government. He continued to serve with excellence. Scripture concludes the chapter by noting that Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel 6:28.
His faith did not remove him from influence, it preserved him within it. This detail matters. Daniel was not rewarded because he survived the lion's den. He survived because his life was already aligned with God. Prosperity followed faithfulness, not the other way around. The narrative refuses to present obedience as a transaction. Daniel did not pray to be rescued. He prayed because prayer defined his relationship with God.
The chapter also clarifies the limits of compromise. The decree lasted only 30 days. Daniel could have reasoned that temporary silence was harmless. He could have argued that God would work for the moral culture of creation.
Daniel understood that obedience delayed is obedience denied. Faithfulness postponed for convenience eventually erodes conviction. Daniel's choice reveals a mature understanding of worship. Worship is not merely what is spoken aloud, it is allegiance. By continuing to pray, Daniel affirmed that no human authority could occupy the place reserved for God, even briefly. The law of the Medes and Persians claimed immutability.
Yet within a single night, its moral weakness was exposed. The law could condemn the innocent,
but could not restrain injustice. It could enforce punishment, but could not produce righteousness.
In contrast, God's authority preserved life, restored justice, and revealed truth. Daniel 6 does not portray conflict as chaos. It portrays it as testing. The pressure Daniel faced was not random. It revealed what already existed in his heart.
The decree did not create faithfulness. It exposed it. The same is true of opposition throughout Scripture. Trials do not generate character, they reveal it.
Daniel's life demonstrates that spiritual habits formed in quiet seasons sustain faith when public pressure arises. His prayer life was not a response to danger. It was preparation long before danger appeared. The chapter closes without spectacle.
There is no celebration described, no return to prominence narrated in detail. Instead, Scripture quietly affirms continuity. Daniel remains faithful. God remains sovereign. History moves forward.
Daniel 6 stands as a testimony that God does not always remove His people from conflict, but He always remains present within it. Deliverance may come through intervention, but faithfulness is demonstrated before intervention ever occurs.
The lion's den becomes not a symbol of fear, but a witness to trust. The law that condemned Daniel becomes evidence of its own insufficiency, and the king who signed the decree becomes a messenger declaring the power of the living God. Through it all, Daniel remains unchanged, anchored not in outcomes but in obedience. Daniel 6 brings us to one of the most searching moments in Scripture, not because of the miracle itself, but because of what it reveals about faith under sustained pressure. This chapter is not primarily about lions nor about political intrigue. It is about loyalty, quiet, consistent, and tested when obedience becomes costly. Daniel's experience shows that faithfulness is not proven in moments of ease, but in moments when devotion conflicts with survival. By the time we reach chapter 6, Daniel is no longer a young exile. He is an elderly statesman, respected, experienced, and well-established. If ever there were a moment when compromise might seem reasonable, this would be it. He had already lived a lifetime of faithfulness. Surely one small adjustment, one temporary silence could be excused. Yet Daniel does not adjust. The central lesson of Daniel 6 is that obedience to God is not situational. It is not calibrated according to convenience, safety, or public opinion. Daniel does not pray because the decree demands a response. He prays because prayer defines who he is. The law threatens his life, but it does not alter his allegiance. This reveals a profound truth. Spiritual habits formed over decades shape responses in moments of crisis. Daniel did not decide to trust God when the decree was issued. He trusted this reveals inseparable lack of profit. The windows toward Jerusalem were not opened in defiance. They were already open in devotion. Daniel 6 also teaches that integrity attracts opposition. The administrators did not hate Daniel because he was ineffective, but because he was faithful. His excellence exposed their corruption. His integrity threatened their comfort. When righteousness cannot be discredited, it is often targeted through regulation. The strategy used against Daniel is revealing. His enemies did not accuse him of wrongdoing. They accused him of faithfulness. They did not attack his competence. They attacked his conscience. This pattern repeats throughout history. When moral conviction becomes inconvenient, systems attempt to redefine it as disloyalty. Daniel's response is instructive. He does not argue his case publicly. He does not rally supporters. He does not resist arrest. He simply continues doing what he has always done, praying to God. His faith is neither aggressive nor defensive. It is steady. The king's distress highlights another important lesson. Unjust systems entrap not only the innocent, but also those who enforce them. Darius recognizes Daniel's integrity, yet feels powerless to intervene. Authority without moral grounding becomes fragile. The law that promised order becomes an instrument of injustice. Daniel's night in the lion's den stands in stark contrast to the king's restless night in the palace. The man condemned to die rests in trust. The man who governs an empire lies awake in anxiety. This reversal exposes where true security lies. Peace is not produced by control, but by confidence in God. When Daniel's delivered, he does not accuse. He does not celebrate publicly. He simply testifies. His words are calm, respectful, and grounded in truth. He attributes his survival to God's intervention and to a life lived without guilt before both heaven and earth. Daniel does not claim innocence only before God. He affirms integrity before the king as well. Faithfulness to God does not negate responsibility to society. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Daniel's loyalty to God made him a better servant to the kingdom, not a worse one. The fate of Daniel's accusers underscores a sobering reality. Injustice eventually consumes those who create it. The same system manipulated to destroy righteousness collapses upon itself. Scripture is clear. The lions were not harmless. The difference was divine protection, not chance. Darius's decree following Daniel's deliverance echoes the confessions of earlier kings in the book of Daniel. Once again, a ruler acknowledges the living God whose kingdom will not be destroyed. This repetition reinforces a central theme of the book. Earthly power repeatedly encounters its limits when confronted by divine authority. Yet, Daniel 6 does not suggest that political systems will suddenly become righteous. The decree honors God, but it does not transform the empire. What it does transform is perspective. It exposes the insufficiency of law without conscience and authority without humility.
Daniel prospers afterward, but the text does not dwell on rewards. The emphasis remains on faithfulness, not outcomes. Daniel's life reminds us that obedience is not a means to success, it is an expression of allegiance.
God's protection does not eliminate risk, it honors trust. The chapter invites reflection beyond ancient history. Daniel 6 speaks to every believer navigating pressure to conform, to remain silent, or to adjust conviction for the sake of safety.
It reminds us that faithfulness is rarely dramatic. More often, it is quiet persistence in what is right. The decree lasted only 30 days, but Daniel understood that obedience suspended for convenience reshapes the heart.
What begins as temporary compromise becomes permanent erosion. Faithfulness postponed becomes faithfulness denied. Daniel's story assures us that God sees acts of loyalty that go unnoticed by the world. The prayers offered quietly, the decisions made without applause, the convictions held without recognition, all are visible to God. The lion's den is not merely a place of danger, it is a place of testimony. It testifies that God honors those who honor Him. It testifies that integrity in cement is never wasted. It testifies that integrity is never wasted. Daniel 6 leaves us with a question that reaches beyond the narrative and presses into the present. Where does your ultimate loyalty rest? Daniel did not know how God would act. He did not pray for deliverance as a condition of obedience. He prayed because obedience defined his relationship with God. His faith was not dependent on outcomes. It was rooted in trust. The God who sent His angel into the den is the same God who walks with His people today. He may not always remove the den, but He never abandons those who trust Him within it.